Super. All right. So here we go. Now, we have covered this one extensively, too, in the series that, again, you can see at lovereimagined.org. But should we be on the lookout for blood moons and signs in the sky?
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, no, this one is kind of, it's very immediate now. There's there was a Charisma article, I guess, in the last issue in September there, again, that's referring to this. But the truth is, this is kind of a recurring thing that happens every few years. And it seems to be tied to several well-known authors, several well-known ministers that have written about it. I won't mention any names, but there has to be a point, and I kind of realize what people are trying to do. People that want to look at blood moons and signs in the sky, they want God to speak to their situation right now. And I wrote this Facebook post about this a few days ago, that I really have sympathy for people who, because of the turmoil, because of the tragedies, because of the even catastrophic situations that have happened, the things that are happening, riots and so on, and the election is coming up, and there's all these kind of world-shaking, people think are world-shaking events that are going on, and they think, well, God has to be saying something about this. There has to be some authority from heaven that can speak to us about this. And so I believe that is partly the impetus for trying to draw things from the biblical text and then put things into the biblical text, because we really do want God to speak. So the question is, what is God speaking about these issues, these serious issues, these events that are happening in the world today and are even happening in our own life? And so I think we have to be careful, though, that we don't just begin to corrupt the Bible with our own agendas, with our own experiences, because the Bible is, although it is well called, I think, an inspired document, a living document, in the sense that it does continue to have meaning for people today. The matter of fact is, it's so important to get into what it meant to the people who wrote it and the people who would have read it in that century. So as long as we do our job in that respect, then after that we can begin to apply it to our life. And I think blood moons in particular is just something that is not, it doesn't take a lot of space in apocalyptic prophecy in the Bible. And I think it's much simpler than people think. I don't think it has as much weight as people are putting on it now. And one of the reasons for that is because the phenomenon we call blood moons right now is very limited in its scope. So I was watching this interview one time where a well-known end times prophetic ministers had invited an astronomer, an actual professional scientist who studies the heavens and studies the celestial bodies, on his show. And they began to, share with him, and they were going to have him share later on, but they began to share with the audience that these blood moons are very significant, that they mean something, and they began to tie it into events that are happening right now. The fact that there was like 4 blood moons in a row was apparently super meaningful, because it was showing emphasis from God about these events. And the astronomer was kind of looking at it. I was trying to judge what he was thinking, and this look of skepticism came across his face. And finally, when they invited him to speak, he really stunned them, and I believe the audience, when he said, well, this is all well and good, but the truth is the blood moons that you're talking about are only visible from the Western Hemisphere, whereas all the events you're pointing to are in Israel, which is in the Eastern Hemisphere. And with that one comment, he kind of just pulled the rug right out from underneath their interpretation. That he showed that it was a very ethnocentric, a very limited geographic view that these guys were espousing, that it was just America that was seeing the blood moons in these eclipses in this way. And but it's not necessarily even happening worldwide. Plus, he said, No, plus he
something
said that it happens all the time. So this has been happening, year after year for a long, long, long time. So there's nothing particularly special about this. It's, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, when you're reading, and I can several references, I'm going to let you go on a little bit, but there's so many references in the Old Testament to things happening with sun, moon, and stars, and all of that, where the sun, moon, and stars weren't just out, okay? Or we wouldn't have a new covenant. We wouldn't be here if there wasn't a sun, moon, and stars right now, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And those things happened, Assyria, Babylon, Egypt. You see that, this apocalyptic language, which basically meant it's lights out, okay? Mm-hmm. And something during these California fires, we really need to pray for folks, and in northwestern United States, this is something also that happened in Jerusalem with the city on fire. If you've seen pictures, you've seen a red moon, okay, in the sky. You've seen the entire sky red.
Right.
And so you can, let's say, there can be conjecture about a lot of things, but these, let's say, when you're talking about sun, moon, and stars and all of that, there's so many, and if you don't bring them up, I'll bring them up in a little while. But there's plenty of old covenant references, that show that these things, this is apocalyptic language, really means it's lights out for a particular kingdom or a religious order or whatever. This is figurative language that anyone in ancient Israel would have understood, and anyone in the first century would have got. Okay, so it doesn't mean that the moon's really actually going to turn to blood, just like it doesn't mean we talked about the literal heaven and earth passing away. Okay, that was, like I said, again, they understood that to be the temple, Jerusalem as they knew it, and the destruction of the old system of worship. Okay, yeah,
exactly. And so just as you said, sun being darkened, moon turning to blood, this is all the way back from Genesis chapter 1, when God created these celestial bodies, where it says that the sun, the moon, and the stars, they are going to be given dominion. They are going to be given a rule. They're going to be given a preeminence, you might say, over the heavens. So the sun will rule the day, right? And then the moon will rule the night, and the stars. Mm-hmm. And he said they will be for signs and for seasons. And so from that, we see that this idea of rulership, this idea of dominion, was attached or linked to these celestial objects. And from there, it became a metaphor, it became an expression in human language, not just in Hebrew language, but in many countries around in the Near East. They viewed the sun, the moon, and the stars as evoking or invoking governments and authorities, as you mentioned, social order, like religious, social, economic health, you might say, of the region, of the nation that's involved. And so, as you said, if the sun is darkened, that must mean that their rulership is gone. It's a very simple one-to-one relationship, that dominion is taken away, governmental authority diminishes, things go down, they become toast, you might say, when these things are used. Moon turning to blood, again, evokes violence. It invokes, blood is the life of the body, and so you might say the life of the nation gets sapped out. The life of the authority apparatus of that nation is they bleed out, basically, you might say.
Yeah. It's lights out, something, and there is, a covenant eschatology commentary. I saw this where, according to the Midrash, which is an ancient Judaic commentary on Hebrew scriptures, the sun represented the king, the moon represented the Sanhedrin, and the stars represented rabbis. And then, we find in Acts 2:16 through 21, where Peter quotes Joel and says, "This is what's happening. This is that." And he talks about wonders in the heaven above, okay, and blood, fire, and vapor of smoke. Verse 20: the sun turned into darkness, the moon into blood, okay, before the day of the Lord come, before AD 70, with the destruction of Jerusalem as the Roman Empire came in. Another place here, you look at Genesis 37:9, where Joseph had a dream. Remember that? And he told his brothers he had a dream, and the sun and moon and 11 stars bowed before him. Okay, these were authority figures. This was his dad, his mom, and his brothers were all bowing before him. And you look in Matthew 24:29, the sun and moon darken, the stars fall from the sky. These astral omens are very similar to heavenly signs said to accompany the fall of Judah in the 6th century BC. You can find that in Jeremiah 4:23-26, the fall of Egypt in the 26th century BC, in the 6th century BC rather. That's Ezekiel 32:7-9, the fall of Babylon in the 6th century BC, Isaiah 13:9-13, and the fall of Edom in the 6th century BC. You'll find that in Isaiah 34:4-5. And just as various heavenly omens marked a great slaughter at the end of the fall of Judah, Egypt, Babylon, and Edom in the 6th century BC, the same thing was expected to occur at the fall of Jerusalem and Israel at the end of the Old Covenant age. So just important stuff and putting things into perspective there.
Yeah. So I want to thank Ryan for he sent me actually the article, photo scans of the whole article. And although we're not able to tackle it point by point, so for Ryan, this goes out to you. What we do want to ask is a few questions about these kind of articles, because Joe, as you know, they appear regularly, like clockwork almost. Now it's interesting. I use the term clockwork because if you go on any NASA app or any astronomy kind of software, you can see very clearly when the next blood moons, like so-called blood moons, which is the eclipses, are going to occur. And they're very regular. They're very deterministic. It means that like a mechanical clock, you can extrapolate the data and be able to see exactly when they're going to occur. Now, you have to wonder to yourself, when does products and books and films and documentaries and video series and things like this, when does products related to blood moons and signs in the sky begin to become a conflict of interest? You know what I mean? Where you're cherry picking events to fit your theory, and then sell products on the other side in order to exploit or take advantage of that regular mechanism. Like, what would be better than to have every few years something that happens, in the sky that guarantees sales of it? That would be a gold mine. Like, people would love if the stock market could be so dependable, right? Instead of fluctuating, unexpectedly, and people get taken by surprise in bull markets and bear markets. What if you had a very dependable mechanism that you could be guaranteed millions off of? So it doesn't, like what I've said, doesn't automatically prove that it's wrong. But I'm saying, when does such a thing become a conflict of interest? When does truth begin to be overshadowed by the need to support these products? The need, you need your theology to fit in order to generate sales. Yeah. Now, I use covenant cards like I have done and like I've done. I don't believe it's in the same category. Like me using these cards, I'm telling you 100%, I have actually changed the content of these cards as my beliefs have changed, and they're in no way set in stone such that I wouldn't go back on anything that I've said. I'm continually growing. I'm continually learning. Like, I'm not here just doing podcasts and live interviews or whatever in order to generate sales for myself. That's not the point. But sometimes I just ask myself the question, considering the regularity of these products coming out and everything is very fearful and immediate, and it needs to be acted on, and people need to, in order to get the information, they need to survive. It's actually linked to people's survival. It links very deep into a deep-seated emotion where, in order to stay abreast of events happening in the world, in order to be ready for what's coming, you need to buy this, or you need to know this. You need to get this in your life. And so it just puts a huge question mark. I don't know how you feel about that, Joe. There's a huge question mark around the whole, like, people talk about the corruption of the military industrial complex. I want to talk about, let's say, the alleged corruption of the eschatological apocalyptic complex, you know, that exists in Christianity, in Christendom today. I think we need to root that whole thing out, man, and get back to a playing field where people can actually derive hope and optimism in the future instead of every few years being hauled back into this doom and gloom environment.
Sure. And if you missed out on anything that we've been saying, I know some new people have tuned in. This will be uploaded to lovereimagined.org in the very near future. You'll be able to find it on YouTube and on the podcast too. So there'll be plenty of ways that you can access this. But really, it was figurative language. Any ancient Israelite would have understood this. Any first century Jew would have understood that sun, moon, and stars, falling, disappearing, had to do with authority figures and also it being lights out for certain political systems, religious systems, whatever it might be. And we've talked about that and proven that through scripture here. So that's been very good. We got some nice comments here. We just thank you so much. Wow. We love you. We're just sharing, from what we know and from, our evolving understanding and, just continued learning between us. We probably have, there's some topics, very few topics that I have tens of thousands of hours under my belt in study. But this is one that I spent a lot of time with. And one of the questions we're going to get to here soon. And it's good to be together. Thank you so much. Now, there is a question here, that I think we can field. I'm gonna let you have this before we get to the next one. The user says, "I'm curious about the darkness that occurred during Christ's crucifixion. Some say it was a solar eclipse. What say you?"
Yeah, this one I'm not entirely sure about. Joe, have you looked into the astronomical data? Because you can go backwards. You can cycle it all the way back, to when you believe that Christ's crucifixion occurred. And of course, that's a bit of a sticky one because was it 30 or was it 31 AD or what have you?
Yeah.
But I haven't investigated that fully. Or could it be simply the cloud cover it was extremely heavy, a phenomenon that God was instrumental in providing there?
I'm inclined to believe it was a supernatural occurrence. But however, the sun, moon, and stars didn't fall. Okay. We're still here. Yeah. Jesus died for us. It wasn't just lights out for the entire planet. That's not the meaning of the cross. So that's it, the crux of it. So it doesn't take away the meaning of it being lights out for political systems or religious systems. Although, like I say, it would either have to be like uber coincidental, because then you have even earthquakes and then people coming out of the graves and you have all this kind of stuff, which is way more than just some, astronomical, phenomenon. This is something deeper. So I'm inclined to believe that it was definitely a supernatural occurrence of creation groaning, because of what had happened to God incarnate, just allowing man to pour their wrath out upon him, where the Father was revealed, this loving God who would rather die at the hands of creation than to see it destroyed. So to me, that's a beautiful thing, but it's a really good question and something with food for thought. So yeah, I hope that helped. Yeah.
And not to mention that in the first century, there were weather patterns and cosmic disturbances that did happen in the sky. We talked about that at length in our Matthew 24 series.
Yeah.
And so what we're saying is not that these phenomena don't interact with spiritual events. Physical phenomena do interact with spiritual events. So the darkness on the crucifixion was indicative or symbolic of something that was going to happen. So, and another one was like the fact that Peter talks about Joel at Pentecost, when the Spirit of God begins to pour out on all flesh, and the people from the surrounding nations who had returned to Jerusalem, all of the Jewish people from different countries speaking different languages around the world, descended on Jerusalem for the feast, and then they are hit by the power of God, and they come to salvation, and then they are sent out. This is Peter says, this is the day of Joel.
Yeah.
And so that the day that Joel talked about. And so extrapolating that, the verses around it in Joel is the sun was darkened and the moon turned to blood. Well, that should be a sign to you that, yeah, when all these salvations happened, plus, when Jesus' crucifixion happened, that there is going to be a consequence for the authorities that are in the way, the authorities that are hindering that. This is there's, as much as it is a blessing, there is also a warning coming with it, that those things are going to be torn down. Everything that has exalted itself against the knowledge of God is going to be torn down in the face of God's knowledge of God and the gospel of God being spread around the world, taking captive people's hearts and so on. And so it definitely could be that this darkness that occurred during Christ's crucifixion was symbolic of that kind of event. Yeah. And we know that the Sanhedrin, because it literally tore the curtain in half, right? There was an earthquake, and then it tore the curtain in half, the huge temple curtain. That's got to mean something. That's a physical phenomenon that had had a very powerful spiritual meaning behind it, that God has basically left the building, like Elvis left the building. God, forget that. God left the building
from top to bottom, and you can't mend it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then even the tombs opened up. And then when Christ rose, the power of his resurrection apparently was so powerful, like I can see a movie of it, a shockwave. Mm-hmm. And that resurrection power just ended up rattling bones and flesh coming back on, and people were rising again and then showing themselves in Jerusalem. I don't know, they knocking on people's doors like, hey, Grandpa's back. You know what? Yeah. It's amazing to talk about, but definitely, yeah. Some of these phenomena do have a symbolic, but what I'm saying is nowadays, every single physical phenomena, is it legitimate to tie that to something spiritual, especially considering the amount of cherry picking? Like if you want to study logical fallacies, cherry picking is a big one, especially around eschatology and apocalyptic media that's being published today. Please study this. I'm doing a whole series coming up on logical fallacies, and I think we'll be able to very clearly see which are being used legitimately and which are being used. Well, sorry, all logical fallacies used in defense of a position is illegitimate. It's just not a smart thing for Christians to do. It makes us look foolish in the minds of people. And if the gospel is already foolish enough to people because of our faith in divine, faith in things that are invisible, faith in things that are not seen yet, that is foolish enough for people. Why are we using logical fallacies to like cherry picking and the genetic fallacy and making ad hominem attacks against people that disagree with us? Why are we using these methods of communication? I think we can be much, much more effective, reasonable to scholars and to people who actually think for a living. And so let's use that when we talk about the last days, and use that when we're talking about the end times. Let's be more rational in our approach.
That's good. That's good. Now,